She looked me dead in the eyes one evening after dinner and said, "I need space." No warning, no argument before that. Just those two words, like she'd been rehearsing them for weeks. I remember staring at her across the table, the candle flickering between us, her face calm and cold, like she'd already moved on. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly, even though I already knew. She sighed, pushing her plate away, her voice detached. "I mean, I can't breathe anymore. I need to be alone. I need space. Everyone tells you that when love ends, it's loud. But that night was silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears, that makes your chest tighten. I didn't yell. I didn't ask her to stay. I just nodded. "All right," I said. She looked surprised, like she expected a fight, tears, something. But I had nothing left to give. That night, I walked through every room of the house we'd built together. The kitchen where we used to cook on Fridays, the couch where she'd fall asleep watching late-night movies, the bedroom that now felt colder than ever. It all looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. I sat at my desk, pulled out a notepad, and wrote one line. "Now you have all the space you need." Then I left my keys on the counter, quietly packed a small bag, and walked out without looking back. The air outside was sharp, fresh, real. I hadn't felt that in years that I drove through the night without a destination. The radio played songs I didn't recognize, and I let them fill the emptiness. Somewhere around dawn, I found myself on the coast, a quiet seaside town where the ocean stretched endlessly and no one knew my name. I rented a small cottage overlooking the water. It wasn't much, one bedroom, cracked walls, a creaky floor, but for the first time, it felt like mine. The sound of the waves became my alarm clock, the salty breeze my companion. I started running in the mornings, something I hadn't done since college. I cooked simple meals, sat on the porch at night watching the horizon fade. Slowly, the noise in my head started to quiet down. At first, I expected her to call, to text, to reach out, even out of guilt or curiosity. But the days turned into weeks, and my phone stayed silent. I'd catch myself checking it sometimes, that old reflex of hope, but nothing came. And then, strangely, I stopped caring. It's incredible how quickly you realize what you were holding onto wasn't love anymore, just habit. I found work at a local marina, helping with small boats, fixing engines, painting hulls. My hands were always busy, my mind always calm. Every night I'd fall asleep exhausted, but at peace. It was the kind of simple satisfaction I didn't know I'd been missing. One evening, an older man named Tom, who owned a few boats there, handed me a cold beer and said, "You look like a man who finally stopped fighting the tide." I laughed for the first time in months. "Maybe I just learned to float," I replied. He nodded like he understood. People here didn't ask questions. They just accepted that everyone had a story, and some chapters needed to be rewritten. I started keeping a journal, not about her, but about what I was rediscovering. The feel of sand under my feet, the quiet joy of watching sunrise alone, the freedom of not being someone else's project. Sometimes I'd think about our last conversation, her saying she needed space. I realized she wasn't lying. She did need it. But what she didn't realize was that so did I. I'd spent years shrinking myself to fit her expectations, walking on eggshells to keep her happy. I'd forgotten what it meant to breathe. Out here, by the ocean, I finally learned how. The first few months passed like that. Peaceful, predictable, healing. I'd see couples walking on the beach sometimes, and for a moment, a part of me would ache. But it wasn't jealousy or regret. It was just acknowledgement. I'd had that once, and it was gone, and that was okay. The sunsets here had a way of making you forgive the past, even if it didn't deserve forgiveness. One day, a letter arrived. No return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. It was hers. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single line. "I thought you'd come back." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and set it aside. There was a time when that sentence would have broken me. Now it just made me sad, not for me, but for her. Because she still didn't understand that leaving wasn't punishment. It was freedom. That night, I went down to the water and let the letter slip from my hand. The tide carried it away, piece by piece, until it was gone. I stood there watching it disappear, the sound of the waves steady and endless. For the first time, I realized I didn't miss her. I didn't miss us. I only missed the version of myself that had believed love meant holding on at all costs. But now I knew better. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't staying. It's walking away quietly, leaving behind everything that once defined you, and trusting that what's ahead will finally let you breathe. And that was the beginning, not of revenge, not of regret, but of something much more powerful: peace. The days in the coastal towns started to blend together, but not in the dull, lifeless way they had back home. Each morning felt clean, uncluttered, like I had hit some invisible reset button on my life. I'd wake up to the sound of the gulls, the rhythmic crash of the waves against the rocks, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the heaviness that used to greet me in the mornings. I'd make coffee, sit on the porch wrapped in a blanket, and watch the ocean breathe. There was something humbling about it. How the water just kept moving, never asking permission, never apologizing. I guess I wanted to be like that. The work at the marina kept me grounded. My hands were always busy, and I liked the honesty of physical labor. Machines didn't lie. If something was broken, you fixed it, and when it worked again, you knew it was because of your effort. People weren't like that. They broke quietly, sometimes without even realizing it, and you could spend years trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. The old-timers at the dock liked me. They didn't pry into my past, just gave me quiet nods of respect. We'd share a few beers after work, talk about fishing, boats, the weather. Nothing heavy, nothing painful. It was exactly what I needed. I had no idea how long I'd stay there, and for once, I didn't care. The absence of plans felt like freedom. One morning, I got a call from an old friend, Matt. He'd heard what happened through someone mutual. "Man, I couldn't believe it," he said, his voice half pity, half curiosity. "You just left?" "Like left. "Yeah," I said simply. Left. There was silence on the line before he let out a low whistle. "Guess you finally took a page from my book. You sound different." "Better." That stuck with me. I did sound different. Or maybe I'd just stopped sounding like someone else's echo. Months passed, and the small cottage started to feel like home. I bought a few secondhand books, a guitar I barely knew how to play, and an old camera I used to capture the sunsets. I wasn't trying to create a new version of myself. I was just rediscovering the one I'd buried under years of compromise. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd find myself replaying our last months together, trying to see if there was something I missed. I'd remember her cold tone, the way she'd scroll on her phone at dinner, her sighs when I asked how her day was. It wasn't sudden, I realized. It had been dying long before she asked for space. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Love doesn't end with a bang. It fades, quietly, until one day you wake up and realize the person you're sleeping next to feels like a stranger. Maybe that was the saddest part. I'd lost her long before she told me she needed space. One evening, I was sitting on the dock, watching the sun sink below the horizon, when a woman named Claire, who worked at the cafe near the marina, sat beside me. She'd seen me around often. "You always look like you're thinking about something important," she said with a half smile. "Or maybe someone." I smiled faintly. "Maybe both." She didn't press for details. We talked about simple things: her dog, her dream of moving to Europe, the way the sea made people honest. Over time, we started sharing dinners, walks, quiet laughs. It wasn't romantic, not at first. It was just two people learning to breathe again. And that was enough. I realized something while sitting across from her one night, the glow from the cafe lights soft on her face. I realized that peace didn't have to be earned through pain. It could simply be chosen. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, especially to the woman who once told me she needed space. I had already given her that, and in doing so, I'd found mine. Sometimes, though, the past found its way back. One rainy afternoon, while I was tightening bolts on a small fishing boat, I heard my name. I turned, and there she was. Laura. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way she never let herself be before. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes tired. "I had to see you," she said softly. I didn't move closer. "You found me," I said, my voice steady. She looked around, as if trying to understand the life I'd built. "You just left everything." "Left me? I thought you'd come back." I wiped my hands on a rag, calm. "I thought you wanted space." She flinched, her eyes filling with the kind of regret that comes too late. "I didn't think you'd actually go." I looked past her, at the endless water stretching into the distance. "Neither did I admitted. She took a step forward. "Can we talk?" I shook my head. "There's nothing left to say, Laura. You wanted freedom. You got it. I just learned what mine looks like too." For a moment, she just stood there, rain falling softly around her, her face pale against the gray sky. Then, quietly, she said, "You've changed." I smiled faintly. Yeah, I stopped waiting for someone to tell me who I'm supposed to be. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, shoulders slumped. I watched her go, but there was no anger in me, no pain, just an odd, quiet gratitude. Because that moment, that simple encounter, confirmed something I already knew. Sometimes the best way to love someone who hurt you is to let them see you no longer need them. I went home that night, lit a small fire, and watched the flames dance. I thought about how far I'd come, not in miles, but in peace. She had wanted space, and I'd given it to her. But in the end, it wasn't her that needed room to breathe. It was me. The next morning came with a heavy mist rolling in from the sea, the kind that makes everything look softer, quieter, like the world is taking a breath before speaking again. I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the fog swallow the boats one by one until the horizon disappeared completely. It felt symbolic somehow. That conversation with Laura had closed a door I didn't even realize was still open. I'd thought I had moved on, but seeing her reminded me how much I had once depended on her validation, how small I used to make myself to fit inside her world. Now, sitting there alone with nothing but the whisper of the waves and the cry of the gulls, I understood that what I'd built wasn't a temporary escape. It was my life now. I had chosen peace over pride, and it was the best decision I'd ever made. Work that day was slow, but steady. I threw myself into it, patching an old sailboat that had been sitting half-abandoned at the far end of the dock. It was tedious, repetitive work, but I loved it. Every stroke of the brush, every turn of the wrench, every sound of the sandpaper scraping against what felt like therapy. Around noon, Claire showed up with sandwiches from the cafe. She had that effortless kindness about her, the kind that never demanded anything in return. She handed me a sandwich and sat on the dock next to me, legs dangling above the water. "You look lighter today," she said, glancing at me with a knowing smile. I chuckled. Maybe I finally let go of something heavy. She nodded like she understood more than I'd said. For a while, we just sat there in silence, eating and watching the seagulls fight over crumbs. It was simple, real, and that simplicity meant more to me than any grand declaration of love I'd ever heard before. After she left, I walked along the shore, thinking about how life has a way of giving you exactly what you need once you stop chasing what you think you want. For so long, I had defined myself by someone else's opinion of me, by Laura's moods, her approval, her attention. I had lived like a guest in my own life. Now, I finally felt like I was home. That night, I sat by the window, the soft hum of the sea outside my cottage blending with the faint strum of the guitar I was teaching myself to play. The music was rough, clumsy, but it was mine. There was something beautiful about imperfection when you stopped fearing it. I'd started to believe that happiness wasn't something you found. It was something you built quietly, one peaceful choice at a time. Over the following weeks, Claire and I grew closer. It wasn't dramatic, not like the love stories you see in movies. It was gentle, natural. She'd stop by after her shift at the cafe, we'd cook dinner together, laugh about small things, share stories about the people who came through town. She had her own past, her own scars, but she carried them with grace, not bitterness. Being around her reminded me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just breathes softly beside you. One evening, as we walked down the beach under a violet sunset, she turned to me and said, "You ever think about going back?" I shook my head immediately. "No, there's nothing for me there anymore." She smiled faintly. "Good, because you seem exactly where you're supposed to be." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her words, about how strange it was that someone who had entered my life so quietly could bring such clarity. I realized then that I didn't need a future plan or some dramatic new beginning. I already had everything I'd been searching for: peace, purpose, and the ability to wake up every morning without feeling like I was suffocating. The past didn't haunt me anymore. It had turned into a lesson, a reminder that love without respect isn't love at all, that silence can be stronger than shouting, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is simply walk away. A few days later, Tom, the old man who'd first given me a chance at the marina, stopped by my cottage. He had a grin on his weathered face and 2 beers in his hands. "You've done good for yourself, son," he said, handing me one. "I've seen a lot of men come here running from something. Most of them don't stay. You did." I raised my bottle. Guess I ran far enough to stop running. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound. You didn't run. You started living. Big difference. After he left, I sat there thinking about that. He was right. I hadn't run away from my old life. I had simply stopped pretending it was mine. I looked around the cottage, the photos of the ocean on the wall, the half-finished guitar leaning against the chair, the small signs of a quiet, steady life I had built. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was real. And that was enough. Weeks turned into months. The weather warmed, the tourists came, and the town buzzed with new energy. One afternoon, while helping a family rent a boat, I noticed Laura again. She was across the street, standing under the awning of a cafe, watching me. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave a small, uncertain wave. I nodded once, polite but detached, then turned back to my work. There was nothing left between us. No anger, no longing, no need for closure. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the one who had lost something. I finished up at the dock, washed my hands, and walked home under the setting sun. That evening, Claire came over with dinner, and we ate by the window as the waves shimmered silver in the twilight. She told a story that made me laugh until tears came to my eyes. It hit me then. The quiet joy of that moment was worth every ounce of pain it took to get there. Sometimes, walking away isn't about pride or revenge. It's about making room for something better to find you. I'd given Laura all the space she'd asked for, but in the end, it was me who found freedom in that distance. Summer bled into autumn, and the ocean that had once felt like an escape now felt like home. The air grew cooler, the waves rougher, the sunsets more dramatic. Every evening, I'd stand by the water, hands in my pockets, feeling the wind cut across my face. There was something grounding about it, the reminder that nature didn't care about heartbreaks or regrets. It just kept moving. I had become a man of quiet routines, small joys, and steady peace. Claire was still in my life, though nothing between us needed labels. We were just two people walking the same road, no expectations, no demands. Sometimes she stayed over, sometimes she didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was honest. That was something I hadn't known for a long time. One afternoon, as I was closing up the marina for the day, I saw a familiar car pull into the lot. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I saw her, Laura, stepping out of the driver's seat, wearing the same perfume I used to buy her on birthdays. She looked different, not just older but smaller somehow, like life had worn down the edges she used to hide behind confidence. I stood still, wiping grease from my hands, waiting for her to come closer. "You really stayed here," she said quietly, almost to herself. I nodded once. Guess I did. She looked around at the boats, the sea, the small cottage visible in the distance. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Peaceful." "It is," I said. "That's kind of the point." She hesitated before asking, "Can we talk?" I thought about it for a moment, then gestured toward the dock. We sat on the edge, the water calm beneath our feet. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I thought you'd come back," she said softly. "I thought you were just trying to scare me." I didn't answer right away. I just stared out at the horizon, the light flickering on the waves. "You told me you needed space," I said eventually. "So I gave it to you. All of it." She looked down, twisting her hands. "I didn't mean for it to end like that." I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. "It didn't end because you said those words, Laura. It ended long before that. You just finally said it out loud." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence between us was heavy, but not bitter. It was the silence of two people who finally understood there was nothing left to fight for. "You seem different," she said after a while. "You used to be softer." I smiled faintly. Maybe I just stopped breaking myself to fit into someone else's life. She flinched at that, and I didn't mean to hurt her, but truth has a way of cutting through years of pretense. "I was wrong," she whispered. "About everything." I didn't reply. There was nothing I needed from her anymore. Not forgiveness, not validation, not closure. I had already made peace with my past. After a while, she stood up, brushing her hair from her face. "You look happy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I am," I answered. "For the first time, I really am." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm glad. Really." I believed her. She walked away without looking back, and I didn't watch her go. There was no satisfaction in that moment, no sense of victory, just acceptance. Life had moved on, and so had I. That night, Claire came over with a bottle of wine. We sat on the porch, the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple. "You okay?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Yeah, it's strange. You think seeing the person who broke you will bring all the old pain back, but it doesn't. It's like meeting a ghost. You remember the shape of them, but not the feeling." She smiled softly. "That's called healing." We sat in silence after that, listening to the distant sound of waves against the shore. I thought about how far I had come, not just in distance, but in who I had become. The man who once begged for love had learned to live without it. The man who once needed validation had found it within himself. I wasn't the broken version she had left behind. I had rebuilt myself from the quiet. Over the next few days, the world kept spinning just as it always had. The marinas stayed busy, the sunsets stayed breathtaking, and my peace stayed unshaken. I started teaching a few kids in town how to handle boats, watching them laugh and stumble through their first lessons. It felt good to give something back, to be part of something simple and real. One evening, after a long day, I walked to the edge of the pier, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear. I thought about Laura, not with anger or longing, but gratitude. Because without her, I might never have left. I might never have found out who I was when no one was telling me what to be. Sometimes, losing someone isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of the chapter where you finally start writing it yourself. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs, and smiled. This was what peace felt like. Not fireworks, not grand gestures, just quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And as the stars came out, I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing yourself for the first time. And that choice, more than anything, is what makes you whole again. If you felt something listening to this story, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, the best stories are the ones that remind us we can always start over.